going to change it up from previous years for this closing plenary. We are going to really try and bring you all into it too. I'm hoping that's going to work out. What we've done is these are four amazing voices. I'm not saying new generation because some of them have been at it for a long time already. This is another generation from the one that we heard previously. And I know that there are several more generations in the room, and that is really amazing because, as we all know, these struggles are taking a very long time. So we all need to be looking at who's coming up behind us, not just who was in front of us. So we're going to ask them a series of questions. I will introduce them. They're going to speak in different orders for each question. But first, let's just give them their introduction. You can read a little more about them in the booklet. Latasha Mays, right here. Amazing RJ leader and the ED and I think founder of New Voices Pittsburgh, a great reproductive justice group. So that's Latasha. Next to her is Koya Whitehat Artichoker. She was born, raised, and is a proud member of the Rosebud Sioux tribe. She's been an activist since age 15, that's what I mean, see? A blogger and a writer, so yeah, that's... Catherine Cross is a PhD student. I can't believe that because I really am learning a lot from her every second. So I feel you must have you must be done. But more to the point, she is a trans feminist activist, writer, and on the board of the Sylvia Rivera Law Project. And finally, because we never let anyone go at Cliff, Kimberly Inez McGuire, who was a student here at Hampshire. She's a queer Latina RJ leader, 10 years already in the movement, blogger, and she is the public affairs director of the National Latina Institute. So in the spirit of that our activism is not just about our heads or issues, but is also about where we've come from and who we are. The first question is asking the panelists to tell us a little bit about their activism, what brought them to it, and what keeps them going. So whoever feels moved to start, go for it. It's like a bad class.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Now y'all better make some noise. You see this panel up here? You know where you're at. I know it's early. I know you all were partying last night. I was personally asleep. But make some noise for yourselves for being here in the room this morning. I bring you greetings from the Steel City, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and the women and girls of color we serve in New Voices Pittsburgh. It is an honor to be here with you this morning. Thank you, Marlene, for allowing me this opportunity to share the work that we are doing in Pittsburgh and in Pennsylvania and now in Cleveland. You know, people always ask, how did you get here? And, you know, sometimes I was saying, and I was just saying the other day, sometimes you don't know the path that you are going, but you just need to go down that path. My activism is born out of my experience living in this country as a black woman. My activism reflects my experiences, my traumas, the violence that is all too common to many of us in this room. Each day, my goal is simply this, is to do my life's work and to do what I love each day to create the community and the country, the nation, and the world that I want to live in. I mean, for me, I often have wondered for myself, where does this come from? You know, is leadership born? Are you born as leaders or are we made as leaders? I want you to know that we're both born and made into leaders, and each of you is a leader right here, right now, today. My DNA is encoded with the gene for activism, resistance, and kicking ass. What brought me to this movement is the March for Women's Lives. Shout out to anybody who was at the March for Women's Lives. Now that makes me feel old, because that was 10 years ago. And I would be remiss in not saying that New Voices Pittsburgh was founded out of the invitation from Malika Redmond and the inimitable Loretta Ross to participate in the March for Women's Lives. We would not be here had it not been for them. And so y'all need to recognize who's in this room today. You need to recognize who has been sharing their wisdom, their lifetime of activism with you. Because we wouldn't be sitting here if it had not been for them. And so, when we came back from that march, the people who were on the bus were like, what's next? So what are we gonna do when we get back? I'm like, I don't know. My job is to get you to DC and get you back. And what I'm gonna do is watch the Color Purple. I also want to shout out my partner in crime and co-founder of New Voices Pittsburgh, Becca Zayla Mguni. We started our work, we started our organization when I was 22 and she was 19. And so, all things are possible. We began with the mantra of Nanny Helen Burroughs. We specialize in the wholly impossible. And that we're still here 10 years later. We're still here. And so what keeps me going is being in this room, being in these spaces, 10 years of movement building in Pittsburgh, and that my belief is that deep, deep, deep down in my soul, I believe that our work is revolutionary. It is revolutionary. It is revolutionary in that all of us, we will bend the moral arc of the universe, not towards justice, but all the way to justice. Thank you.
I like when you're asked things, but you don't really have a choice. So my name is Koya White Hat Artichoker, and I just want to extend the thanks to Marlene and Cliff and Vero and Mia for inviting me to be here. Thank you. It's my third year coming here, and it's always really exciting. And it's such a I always feel like it's this strange little vortex of RJ, because we're in Western Mass, right? It was like the first year I came, I was like, I don't know where they're taking me. But this seems like a legit shuttle, so I'm gonna hang in. I had the wonderful privilege of having a mother who was an activist. My mother worked in the domestic violence field for, 20, 30 years in South Dakota on the Pine Ridge Reservation and the Rosebud Reservation. And so I actually was, I was kind of like one of those weird sort of activisty kids that you had in your school, and you're like, why are they always talking about shit? We're like 8, let it go. It was like, I'm at home and my mom won't stop yelling at the TV. I don't know what to do. I always kind of grew up really sort of immersed in the domestic violence movement, and really watching people doing real hardcore grassroots organizing in the poorest counties in the country, and with Native women, and my community experiences high rates of violence. What really kind of turned the corner for me in my activism was when I was 15 years old, a woman by the name of Sharon Asatoyer, who runs the Inner Women's Resource Center, thank you, in Lake Andes, called my mom and was like, hey, do you think Koya would want to go to pro-choice training for young students? And what got me was that it was in New York, and I was like, I've never seen a building taller than 8 floors. Let's do it. So I went to New York and I was trained by college students in kind of what at that time was pro-choice work. That's what we were calling it. Specifically to do organizing in my high school and with people who are my age. And it changed my life. It was like 3 days with these women who blew my mind. Bold, really extraordinarily smart, and weren't that much older than me. And it really, that was like, I kind of had been primed to be an activist beforehand, but it was kind of all over the place. And this really gave me purpose. So I really credit the beginning of my activism career in the RJ movement, really, before it was RJ, but this was my political home from the beginning. And then I went on into other activism around queerness and Native organizing. So that was really kind of what brought me into it, but I agree with Latasha that I know that I stand here because of some fierce Native women in western South Dakota, like Cecilia Fire Thunder, Tilly Black Bear, my mother, Karen Artichoker. And there are lots of other Native women that, too many to name, but who really took the time to sort of nurture my activism. And I think, I don't know, after a while sort of were hoping that I would be here someday, that I would be in these rooms and that I would be in the different places talking about the things that I'm talking about. And hopefully not being a representative of all Native people, but talking about the struggles of Native people. So for me that, I take my activism very personally, and it is deeply rooted in where I'm from. And I feel a great sense of responsibility to the women who got me here and to my ancestors who survived for me to be here. So, and with that, I will pass it on.
Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
So, mercifully, I have had time now to think about this question. Obviously, I cannot begin without, of course, thanking everyone that made this conference possible, that made it possible for me to be here, that provided the financial and social resources that make attending a conference like this far easier than any other conference I've been to. As an academic, I can tell you the norm is a conference registration fee just to get in the door of several $100s. The fact that CLPP is not that kind of conference is what makes the presence of everyone here possible. And, thinking of CLPP and what makes it possible also makes me think of my own background as an activist, as a scholar, and why it is I'm able to be here in a more existential sense. Because it has been throughout my life a collective process to get me where I am. I'm proud of the work that I've done, I'm proud of the organizations that I serve, but I am fully aware of the fact that without people like my mother, without people like other trans women of color, I could not be standing here today, because there is a tremendous amount of psychic support that necessarily goes into doing work like this. But even before you can start doing the work as a trans woman, you must reach a point where you can proudly asseverate your own identity as a trans woman. You have to be able to come out, you have to feel a certain amount of pride athwart a society that tells you in 1,000 different ways that you are at best a joke for cisgender people and at worst deserving only of death and oblivion. When you combine that with growing up in a poor neighborhood in the Bronx as a Latina, to working class parents who are not well educated in the formal sense, it means that, to use an image that always stayed with me from the revolutionary anthology, This Bridge Called My Back, it's like constantly walking on a knife's edge above the abyss. And the fact that I am here, to use a Dungeons and Dragons metaphor, is the result of me having rolled many 20s throughout my life as a result of that. Because as certainly growing up where I grew up, walking on that knife's edge, the tumble check for that is really, really high. And so I owe that to a mother who, although she was never formally an activist, imbued me with the mindset I needed to be a strong and confident woman. Because she modeled that growing up as a housewife in this day and age with a father that was somewhat emotionally abusive, and yet modeled a strength and indefatigability that I take with me everywhere I go. I am here because of her, not just because she raised me, but because she taught me how to be a woman in the face of patriarchy, with everything and all the complexities that that involves, all the compromises, all the hurt, all the tears. I've seen it, all the wounds, I have seen them. I was there to mend them as she was there to mend mine. And when I came out, her reaction, as one might imagine, was something like, what? But she actually, much to her credit, without any of the vaunted formal language or activist education that is sometimes prized in a way that puts it out of the reach of others, she knew what the right thing was to do. She didn't know much about being trans, but she knew now that she had a daughter, not a son, and that she was going to have to find a way to raise me differently. And that she did, to her eternal credit. And she fought with my father to make sure I didn't get thrown out of my home. Because if I had been, I most certainly would not be here. That is one of the prevailing conditions of too many young LGBT people. It's why we have a very high rate of homelessness and a very high rate, 41% actually, of attempted suicide. Those of us who remain, 41% of us have attempted suicide at some point in our lives. Thankfully, I was not one of them, but suicide is a constant companion. It's sort of like, you know, your little daemon following you around. And that's definitely. And so I got to where I am today because of the collective process of raising me, of nurturing me as an activist. And I am very proud of my family. And by that, I mean not just my parents, but also my community of trans women of color that I depend on every day. Thank you.
So to continue on the theme of nerdiness, you know, I frequently talk about my activism and the activism of those that I work with as, you know, this is our superhero origin story, right? We know that every superhero has an origin story. And I think, like many of us on this panel, you know, mine really begins with my given and my chosen family. There's been a lot of talk about mamas up here, so I'm going to continue that. My mom is very, very near and dear to my heart. You know, my activism comes from my family. My grandmother was raised by the midwife who delivered her because her own family walked away from her. She was raised by a midwife who had 10 other children and a one-room home, and yet brought her into the home as another child, welcomed into the family. You know, I think that spirit of bringing life and nurturing it is something that I try to honor with the work that I do. My own mother was, you know, injured and nearly lost her life, the life of my sister, because of poor reproductive health care. She was a young Latina. Her doctor didn't care enough to give her the care she needed, and that was the creation of my family. You know, creation through this pain and struggle of poor reproductive health care. And I carry that with me as well, and I think about how to honor her experience and how to do whatever I can to ensure that women like her don't have to go through that again. You know, my activism was also born in this very room in which we're sitting. I had the incredible honor and pleasure of going to Hampshire College and being part of CLPP from when I was 17 years old and bright-eyed, and I didn't know what RJ was. You know, the schooling gave me the frame, it gave me the words for things I had felt my whole life. It gave me words for my own identity, for my own interaction with the world. And then again, you know, through CLPP, through the Rasky internship, I got to get my hands dirty. I got to go out into the community and do organizing. I got to stand on street corners and talk to folks about emergency contraception. Strangers, hey, have you heard about EC? Let's talk about getting it over the counter. You know, it was going from that place of theory and thinking to a place of community and conversation that enabled me to do the work that I do today. So that's a little bit about my origin story.
Thank you. Whew. Okay then. There's only 4 more questions, but we'll we'll do the best we can. So there was a wonderful board chair of the Hampshire board, Florence Ladd. She's a beautiful writer. And when she was the chair, she started every meeting with the following question: what keeps you up at night? Or what are the biggest challenges? No more than 3. I know who I'm in the room with. That your organization or movement faces. So should we maybe start? The last shall be first.
Yeah, happy to mix it up. God, what keeps me up at night? That's a big question. So I'll talk about 2 things. The dynamics of reproductive justice as it relates to other movements is something that keeps me up at night. I think that RJ has so much to offer as a frame, as a way of thinking to immigrant rights, to health equity, to LGBTQ liberation. These movements are intertwined within RJ. They're part of how RJ has always been done. And I think about, how can we represent RJ to folks for whom those words don't carry the same meaning that they do for us? How do you explain RJ in 30 seconds or less? That keeps me up at night. But I think also, how we navigate this really interesting moment where there is a spotlight on RJ that has never been before. We're cool, we're hip, we're like trendy somehow, which is an incredible opportunity to bring the wisdom and the lens of RJ to new places, but it also comes with the danger of co-optation. It comes with the danger of the erasure of our histories, the erasure of our foremothers, the erasure of those that do this work today. Because I will tell you that if they take this from us, they will not tell our stories. They will tell their stories. That keeps me up at night. And a third thing that keeps me up at night is how within RJ we can do better to surface, investigate, and talk about the racism that continues to persist within our movement and within all of our spaces. We need all of our voices, we need all of our communities to continue as we bend the arc all the way to justice. Thank you, Latasha. And I worry about, as RJ gets squeezed by funding shortages, by political difficulty, who gets squeezed out?
I'm gonna do a remix. I'm gonna go now. What keeps me up at night, oftentimes at 2 and 3 in the morning, is this work, is our work, is my work in vain? Like, to what end? To what end are we doing this work? To what end are we sacrificing ourselves to do this work? Where, maybe it's not always authentic, that the things that we are organizing and elevating in the experiences of women and people of color, we're not reflecting or modeling in our own lives. And I look at that for myself. If I'm going to talk about the health and well-being of Black women and girls, then I damn well better be healthy and well myself. Right. And be a leader in my organization and be a leader in our movement. That keeps me up at night. And related to that is the pace of our work and the limitless, innumerable, infinite things that have to be done on a daily basis. I wrote down all the things, all my roles, all my jobs. I had like 30 things on there, y'all. I had payroll, social media, funding, speaking, supervision, HR, office management. I am the tech person at New Voices Pittsburgh. So how do I get out of that so that my list can be manageable and not so daunting and seeming like it's insurmountable? And then also I think about our movement, the state of our movement in terms of our relationships. What kind of healing and truth and reconciliation needs to happen amongst us? And that so that we don't see each other as competitors, but as comrades and in solidarity for this very important work for a movement this movement, and no other movement has ever been about us in this room. And so we have worked so long in silos and worked so long separately. But the thing about the reproductive justice movement, one of the most exciting and revolutionary things is intersectionality. Intersectionality in all things, our identities, our issues, and our movements. So those are the things that keep me up at night. And but slowly, I'm getting to bed earlier.
Yeah, I believe Latasha's list is long. I know I'm harassing her sometimes, like, hey. She's like, do you know I'm busy? But it's me. No, I'm just kidding. We sit on the board of Sister Song together, so I'm just not harassing her just to harass her. But yes, give it up for Sister Song. So the three things that keep me up at night, missing and murdered Indian women. This is an epidemic, and I feel like if you come from where I come from, you know this. This is what we talk about, and there is not, it's really hard to find somebody who's not affected by this. And I feel like they do a really great job of talking about this in Canada. They're really explicit about it. There's organizing efforts, and there's this beautiful project of creation of like the tops of moccasins, vamps, and they did an exhibit, and it was just a room full of the top of moccasins, a whole room. And to say that I have a cousin who was missing and a murdered Indian woman, and it changed my aunt's life. She is not the same person, and she is not gonna be the same person. And I think that part of what concerns me is that I don't hear about this in other spaces. Like as Native women, we talk about it all the time. It is an issue for us. It is ever present. We are aware of the rates of violence against our communities, and I just don't hear it in other places. So I really want to raise that issue, and I really encourage you to go and just enter MMIW on Twitter or into the Google browser and take a look at some of the work that is being done around this issue and amplify it, because I know all y'all know how to tweet. I know you're tweeting right now, I see it. The other issue that keeps me up at night is the Keystone XL pipeline. And I think this again ties to treaty rights, it ties to indigenous land, it ties to the health and wellness of our communities. And if you need me to tie it directly to RJ, it also has an impact on birth rates and low birth rates, or low weight births, and other sort of things impacting children in the womb. But also, again, they talk about it really well in Canada. I mean, because in part, I think they're the front lines of it, but it is coming to us. It is here, it is in North Dakota, it is in South Dakota, it's happening, and the administration is silent on it. And so people are protesting, but I feel like there's a lot of momentum, and it's critical to pay attention to this issue. It will have an impact on all of us at some point. And the other thing that keeps me awake at night is the lack of representation of other Native women in these spaces. It is way too easy for me to become an expert on things, and I can't be the only one, right? And I'm not that smart, honestly. I mean, I can give you some opinions on things, but there are some smart other Native women out there, and I want to see them more. And I say that as somebody who's kind of wandered around in the last 3 years in various RJ spaces, and I can like count on one hand the names that come up consistently, and the folks who are consistently asked, and I'm one of them. But there are others out there. I was like, where's Sonny Clifford? You know? So I really want to push people to think about Native women and think about their representation in RJ spaces. And while I'm happy to be invited to places, I'm also happy to not go if somebody else can go. because we need to be nurturing the leadership of Native women and helping them to come up in the ways that I was brought up.
So I will actually talk about just two things that keep me up at night. The first is the persistence of the prison industrial complex, which is, I should say, the suffix industrial complex has become rather widely overused in my opinion, but the prison industrial complex is the terrifying social structure that that suffix was made for, and indeed it's barely descriptive enough to describe its hideous dimensions. It intersects with everything. It intersects with reproductive justice, it intersects with racism, anti-LGBTQ persecution, and misogyny. And what keeps me up is not the lack of awareness in this room. And certainly everyone snapping along to what I've just said is a reminder that we all know. What keeps me up is the durability of this institution. Because if you look at, for instance, just what I often report on, transgender issues, there has been progress made in a number of areas, right? We are getting gendered corrective laws are being passed in our favor and things like that. But if you look at borders, if you look at ICE, if you look at secure communities, if you look at the persecution of trans sex workers of color in particular, if you look at, of course, jails and prisons, what you find is a completely unreconstructed social system that is as transphobic as it was in the 1970s. That has not changed. There has been a shocking intransigence there, and that does keep me up at night. And I worry a great deal about what that means. The prison industrial complex and the system of borders and immigration control that we have is what I've called patriarchy's skeleton. Its durability indicates that it is a central structure that holds up everything else in patriarchy, and it will continue walking zombie-like with that structure lest we dismantle it. The second thing that keeps me up at night is the fear that the entirely justifiable rage that many of us feel at things like the durability of the PIC, among other oppressions, is sometimes unfairly directed into our own communities, and that we run the serious risk of destroying each other and burning each other out. It's very easy in many ways for us to talk about, at least in these spaces, about the ways in which our society does many petty destructions to us on the daily. But we also sometimes hurt each other with our rage. And our rage sometimes runs the risk of being a directionless fury that will steer us into the abyss that I mentioned earlier. And it's not always easy for us to confront because our anger is righteous and it is justified. But what worries me is when it gets sometimes directed inward in ways that are not entirely productive, in ways that end up destroying more than it creates. And so that has left me deeply worried a number of nights and has quite literally kept me up nights. So.
Thank you. And now, if you're up in the middle of the night, you know what to do. Call these people. Deep thoughts. Deep thoughts. We'll be publicizing their cell phone number. Okay, and so now to take it to your dreams. He's kind of asleep. We must be very tired when we make these questions. But what is your dream for the movement? Speaking to it from the work, the place that you're coming to the RJ. Whoever wants it.
I will say just very briefly that my dream is for the movement itself, rather than the utopia that we're all trying to create, is a movement where, most personally to me, trans women are unproblematically acknowledged as women and as sisters in the struggle that we share. We are recognized not just as an intersectional identity that brings a unique micrological perspective, but also that we have something to say about the condition of being woman, period, in our society. And that respect is died deep into every stitching of this movement. And it is deep in everything that we do. And then just a unified movement where the subtle patterns of racism and classism that reproduce what we already know and deal with in every other part of the world are no longer as salient as they are today, where we actually have a movement that is not racist, that does not have class barriers to participation, that does not require you to buy your way into activism, which far too many of us, whatever our beliefs, have to do, because so many of the prerequisites for doing this work are expensive. And so that, it may sound a little cliche and broad, but that's my vision, what I would like to see the movement look like.
My dream for the movement. I think that my dream is that we truly honor the great potential and deep commitments of human rights, which is in the very heart of the reproductive justice framework. And I'm looking at Loretta as I say this. We were born of a deep commitment to human rights, and I think that's something that we need to do a better job of honoring. And I think about that in two contexts in particular. One in the context of immigrant rights. We've been in several discussions throughout the weekend about the sort of state of immigrant health and rights, and what I keep coming back to is 99% of the mainstream conversation is around who gets to be in this special category, and then we'll start giving them and affording them their human rights, right? It's rather than a conversation about how do we ensure and uphold the human rights of every single person who is here, regardless of if they ever get the right papers. That is human rights. You don't have to wait in line for human rights. That's not how it works. So that is one of my dreams. And connected to that dream, I also think about how much of the conversation around access to abortion is framed. And primarily not by RJ folks, but we need to do better about bringing our brothers and sisters along. It drives me up the wall how much of the conversation about abortion access has been limited to defending abortion access for those who have been the survivors of sexual assault. As a survivor of sexual assault, I find it deeply offensive the way that survivors are used as a political bargaining chip to justify abortion, because we are not willing to stand up for the ability of every single person to get an abortion, regardless of how they got pregnant. That's my dreams.
My dream is simply that reproductive justice is no longer a radical idea. Like, we aren't on the fringe, we aren't on the margins, we're at the center and the vanguard of a new movement in this country, and we have to understand the power in that for others to understand the power in that. I think that out of that idea is that all of our organizations, that there doesn't have to just be one. There just doesn't have to be one organization representing this community or that community or another community. We need all of us at the table, because as Loretta says, if we're not at the table, we are
on the menu.
Okay? And so my dream is that we all have our movement, we have what we need to be healthy, sustainable, and more than anything, to be effective and strategic in achieving our goals towards human rights. My other dream is that we say in New Voices Pittsburgh, know your history. Like, know who built this movement. Know that this is not new. We came up for a term with it 20 years ago, but our ancestors have been doing reproductive justice since we arrived in this country, and for those who are already here. So know your history. Know about Loretta Ross. Know about Daison Jolly. Know about Luce Rodriguez. So know your history, and know about those my peers, all of us on this panel, but know about a Paris Hatcher. And a Heidi Williamson and a Jasmine Burnett. And I'm just going around the room, and Isha Pandit, like, the most brilliant minds of our movement are in this room right now. And so recognize that, appreciate that, and take the time to learn from our experiences that we've had 10, 15 years in the movement. I can't even believe I'm saying that. So that's my dream.
So I think my dream is like a bigger societal problem, but I called it out in a panel I did on adoption yesterday, but like our society has a serious problem with racism. But you know, this permeates down to all of our movements, and I feel like in RJ, and as a board member of Sister Song, you know, there are women of color organizations struggling financially, and where are the resources going? You know, to large RJ Incs. That's what I call them. They're like incorporated and shit. But you know, I feel like that's a real issue, and I say that as a board member of Sister Song, who's been like struggling to reemerge for the last 2 years, and is, you know, let me give a shout out to Monica Ray Simpson. I love that woman. She's dynamic and charismatic, and she is the reason Sister Song is still here. Like, I just want to put that out there. She has worked so hard. And part of me, you know, that's part of what keeps me awake, but it's also part of my hope is that we can take an honest look at kind of what's happening in funding for RJ and do some pushback, because our communities deserve more money. We are on the ground, you're doing groundbreaking work, amazing organizing, and we are not supported in the ways that a Planned Parenthood is or a NARAL, and it bugs the hell out of me. It just bothers me so much. And we need to respect the work of women of color. So I'm talking about, and I just want to throw out some names, right? Young Women United, CLRJ, Voices Pittsburgh, Sister Song, American Women's Resource Center. You know, like, I want you all to think about that, to talk about it. We need to talk about racism in our movement, because the real effects of it really happen in funding. And this idea that women of color are incompetent or cannot do budgets or don't know how to run an organization, and it's bullshit. And we need to say it.
Over now.
Yes. Yes, you bold, visionary dreamers. Amazing. So, can you give us some advice based on all your experience and thinking about cross-movement work? I mean, it's the kind of thing that Kimberly raised already here, but how to achieve common goals and connect with other issues and movements from the RJ perspective. We're just passing the throw glass. It's a ritual.
I can start. So cross-movement work is something that I think about a lot. It's something that's really deep in the heart of what the work that NLRH does, because we cannot achieve our goals if we're not working with health equity groups, or working with immigrant health and rights groups. So two pieces of advice. I'm humbled by the question. I don't know that I'm in the position to be giving advice, but I'll try. I think many people in this room have great advice on this topic. So one is, and it seems simple, but we forget it too often, show up for other people before you ask them to show up for you. our issues to this movement or that movement or that movement, as though we're marketing ourselves. And I don't think that that's the right tactic. It's about showing up at 7 in the morning for their rally on voter rights, for their rally on immigrant rights, for their rally on sovereignty, and closing our mouths and standing behind and standing with and standing in solidarity before we come with our list of demands. So that feels very important to me. And a second piece of the work, and this in particular, when I think about how do we do work with LGBTQ liberation, how do we be in solidarity, how do we lift up that as we've talked about throughout the weekend, RJ has always been queer, it's always been led by queer folks. And it's that we, as RJ, we love our frameworks, we love our words, we love our academic, thinking around the work. But I think we could spend a little less time worrying ourselves about the language and more about what are we doing to actually show up for these communities, right? So rather than having a conversation about how do we talk about RJ in a way that feels good for LGBTQ folks, like how do we actually make sure that LGBTQ folks are getting reproductive health services? Like just go straight to the things that people need, because I can tell you that in my experience, even if you show up with imperfect language or an imperfect framework, if you are showing up, that is much better than perfect language that sits at home and blogs about it and tweets about it. Not to say I'm not blogging my peers, because I love y'all. But I think we can worry ourselves into this sort of, puzzle of language rather than thinking about the work that we're doing.
Yeah, and there are a couple of things that I can say that build on that. We in our communities develop insights on the basis of our shared experiences. This is real knowledge that greatly transcends the rote learning of, say, the classroom. We all learn from sort of the classroom of our own experiences as marginalized people working in these movements. These insights, however, should not be formalized into rules that necessarily act as barriers to the participation of others. Like talking about my mother earlier, she's somebody that still would say transgendered, which I know annoys some people, but I understand where she's coming from, and she's shown up for me and my sisters in ways that people who get that language perfectly don't, right? And so where it becomes more of this exercise in academic perfection to no good end. The insights exist to facilitate action. We should not make them rules for their own sake that are merely self-perpetuating and self-referential. And if I may be crude for a moment, I love scholarship, but I am not here for academic onanism. And so and the other major insight also that I think I can bring in terms of, building more constructive movements is to recognize what intersectionality actually is. It is not we are all these little subdivided building blocks with each of a different color. It means that what identity is free-flowing through each and every one of us. And our experiences are not assimilable to a very simplistic framework of what intersectionality is oftentimes misunderstood to be. That, like I said earlier, trans women have something to say about being women. I have something to say about being Latina. I don't just have something to say about some platonic ideal of the specific issues of what trans stuff is, right? And that applies to all of us. This is where tokenism comes from, for people of color from a variety of communities. Everyone here, irrespective of their background, has something to say about the issues that affect all of us, something important to say. And in our movements, we often marginalize that because we think, you can talk about black issues, or you can talk about immigrant rights issues, or you can do the LGBTQ thing, even though 3 of those letters don't really apply to you, right? And so we mistake intersectionality for the very thing it was meant to replace, which is this segmented identitarianism that is far more destructive than constructive. Everyone here has something to say about gender, about race, about sexuality, intersectionality, about class, and those insights should be heard, not merely segregated into specialized panels where we may not even know every single thing on every issue appertaining to my community. You know, when I was on the transfeminism panel, there were things that I couldn't say that my other two panelists were able to say, were able to do well, because they brought that experience. We are diverse. Not all trans women are the same. Not all trans Latinas are the same. That's why I was grateful. That's why I was grateful that there were 3 trans Latinas on that panel. It was a magnificent reminder that diversity exists within those subcategories as well, which matters to understand. We are all human, and that means something.
What do you say? What do you say? I don't know if I have advice, but I want to talk about a collaboration I did with the California Latinas for Reproductive Justice, who I adore them, and Laura Jimenez is a bad I just want to call her out as one amazing leader in our movement. So this summer, the Supreme Court was doing some crazy things. And what do we expect, right? They wear robes to work. But there was a week where there was a decision on the Voting Rights Act, and there was a decision on DOMA Prop 8, and what people did not pay attention to was there was a decision on the Indian Child Welfare Act, and the Baby Veronica case, as it's known. And for me, as a queer woman of color, as a queer Native woman, it was a heartbreaking week, because the queers were celebrating about their ability to get married, which I don't really care about anyways, but there was nothing in queer community about the Indian Child Welfare Act. And as somebody who lives at the intersections of these identities, it was painful to see. It was painful to live through. And what I really, so when I think about what intersectionality looks like, and what, how I hope that our movement moves forward is, I was approached by California Latinos for Reproductive Justice before the decision came down to write a blog for them about it. And it was brilliant. I appreciated the invitation. And part of what we talked about was what it means to have an indigenous identity. As Latinas in the US and as Native people in the US, we have different colonizers, but we are indigenous to the Americas. And so part of what we talked about in that was kind of wanting to uphold that and to have that as a place of solidarity and political unity. So they wrote the introduction talking about that and why they asked me to do the article. And then I went on blast on the Supreme Court. But to me, it was really, like, nobody else approached me. You know, I work in Minnesota. There are some, I don't work with the groups in Minnesota who do pro-choice work. I don't even think they do RJ work. No offense, I think Ho is here. She's a great person. But I feel like what it really just struck me that, you know, we, and I love CLRJ for approaching me, but it's like, we still haven't there are places in our movement that haven't figured out how to make those connections. And I think that's part of what my dream is for our movement, is that we do figure out better how to do that. And then also just to say that, you know, what also struck me as we wrote that article, and what I've been thinking about a lot is, you know, Indian kids in South Dakota, they make up 13.8% of the state's population for children, and they represent 56.3% of the kids in foster care. And 87% of them get placed in white homes. So what the, you know, and the Indian Child Welfare Act was designed to prevent this, and it is virtually being ignored in places all over the country. And for me, I bring this up because we need to see this as two things. One, it is a continuation of the genocide of Native people. The UN defines genocide as part of their definition, the intentional removal of children. So this is still happening here. Indian wars are not over, and it's happening in my community. And the other thing that it brings up for me, and I was thinking about, as part of what we talked in that article about as well, is the deportation of immigrant folks who leave children who are U.S. citizens. So there is a pool of children being created in the foster care system whose parents have been deported, right? And then it makes me think about Florida, and think about Trayvon Martin, and all the other, black kids who are not safe walking down the street. Can't even walk down the street. So part of what that tells me is that we have to find ways to be in solidarity with each other as women of color and people of color communities, because across the board, our children are not safe. They're not safe, and it is a crisis for all of us, and it's going to have an impact on future generations. And I say that as somebody who has witnessed what boarding schools have done to my community, and it's awful. And I think that we know that our children are sacred, and they are our next generation. And I hope that we find ways better to work together to protect them.
Just a few things. New Voices Pittsburgh, I truly believe that we can stand proud and tall and strong today is because of one thing, and that's our integrity. Integrity is everything. Your word, your reputation, your actions, it is everything. And sometimes we forget that for short-term gains, we discount our work and our vision for, the prospect of money, the prospect of elevating ourselves in this movement. But we have to not be fooled by those things. How do you want to be remembered for the work that you do? Let your words and your reputations and your actions speak for you. In terms of intersectional movements, I think that it is critical that we understand that your destiny is connected to my destiny, and my destiny is connected to your destiny. And I don't believe we have mastered that yet. Y'all can clap. Because if there's never this idea or thinking or belief or operating in our movements that, inevitably, all the things we've talked about on this panel, that they don't matter to me, that they don't affect me in any way, and that there's no way that we can work together in tandem towards a common goal, then what are we here for? For too long we've worked and operated in silos and in separate issues in our separate racial, ethnic, and cultural groups, and it's just time for us to be together in solidarity. One of the movements where we've been able to do intersectional work is around reproductive justice and environmental justice. And some of you may be familiar with our conference, the King Slaughton Twist Environmental and Reproductive Justice Conference. For me, working with other movements, I've learned more about reproductive justice from working on environmental justice, and that we forget that there's room for us to learn and to grow. That we aren't at the end of our learning when we put time into our movements and we, identify ourselves as leaders in this movement. Rebecca Zala she has such a great understanding of environmental justice and really inspires the conference. We think about fracking and we talk about the pipeline. It's such a very realistic metaphor for the way this world treats and values all women. And so fracking and drilling the earth is akin to the violation of women that we experience every day. We want to use women up and use our resources up, and we want to poison women and vilify her for her condition, all at the same time. And so we have to have broader ideas about our issues in both the reproductive justice and environmental justice movements and across other social change and human rights movements. And understand that at the root of it all is racism. And, you know, I'm just coming to this. You keep learning that racism and sexism, they're the stage from which all these other oppressions play out. And so once we have to dismantle and unroot racism all around the world to really achieve our goals. Last thing I'll say is that, again, Monica, who is the leader of Sister Song and what we would call the mothership, you know, the work that needs to be done and our movement supporting Marissa Alexander, she is the face. So in Monica's leadership, you know, Sister Song will be hosting Reproductive Justice Institute in Florida in July. And so we encourage all of you to be there and to follow Sister Song for more information. But that's the perfect example of showing up. The perfect example of the integrity of why you're in this movement or any movement you affiliate with, and the perfect example of your destiny being bound up with the destiny of someone like Marissa Alexander. Thank you.
So thank you all for sharing your knowledge and wisdom and insight and brilliance. And I'd like to open it up to everyone else now. We have about 20 minutes for people to either engage yourself with the questions that they just answered, or to ask new ones, or to answer new ones. So the floor is open. And just talk as loudly as you can, and I'll also would say the question through the mic so that everyone can hear it. Everyone is still speechless. They're still living with segmented identitarianism. Yeah, go ahead.
So one thing that I'm really hearing from a lot of the panelists is, talk around solidarity and coming together and really moving together. But I'm wondering, I'm not hearing anything. Well, I'm not hearing folks really talking about anti-blackness and anti-blackness and communities and how sometimes can achieve this solidarity is here. I don't know if folks. I just wanted to name that.
Okay, I'm going to take a few comments and then let the panel do it. Okay, so that was one about in people of color communities, anti-blackness, and how that can impede solidarity. Okay, yeah, up at the top.
Sort of similarly to what Morgan said, how we really deal with issues of access and disability at the conference specifically, but also in our movement work, not as just a heavy concept, but in real nuts and bolts infrastructure access to and how we build that.
Did everybody hear that? How to deal with access and disability in real ways and build on it, and again, in thinking about solidarity. Another? Yeah, great.
Yeah, I just wonder if you could speak more about capitalism in relation to capitalist patriarchy and all of these issues, how racism imposes with capitalism.
You need more than it sucks. The question is about capitalism and what the panelists say a little more. And one last one up there, yeah.
I am curious about the longevity and sustainability of your beautiful minds, bodies, and spirits as you do this work. Healing is such an incredible and crucial part of decolonization for all of us. So I'm curious about the strategies that you lean into as you do this work and hold a lot of trauma, both from your ancestors and from the stories of women and girls and queer and trans people that you hold every single day. How do you take care of yourself? How do you take care of the people that you walk with?
Healing and self-care. So is that
Small questions.
Yeah, I know. Thank you for saving the hard questions for later. So just pick up on whatever access and disability, racism. racism within people of color movements, especially against blacks, capitalism, and sustainability. And so,
So I just wanna hop in on, well, each one I can say something about, but thank you for the question about capitalism, because I feel like this is really, I'm not gonna say I'm an anarchist, but, because that seems kind of extreme. But, and I haven't been that yet, right? So, but I do think that we really, I would really hope, I was having a conversation with somebody about this the other day, and I was like, you know, almost every ill that we're facing is in some way, in my mind, tied to capitalism. And I really want, I really hope that people would think critically about capitalism. And part of what bothers me about it is, in looking at capitalism as an economic system, there will always be a 1%, and there has to be an underclass. There has to be an underclass. And so I feel like part of what sounds and surprises me on the daily is that we continue to participate in a system that would demand that some of us suffer and die in its hands. And we do it unquestioningly, and we just kind of roll with it. And as a Native person, I feel like one of the things that we have to offer to a lot of movements is the gift of memory. And I can tell you that capitalism is not the only way to have a society, because we have societies that didn't operate on capitalism. And so what that means is that people like to feed us the idea that capitalism is all that we have, and it's not. And we have to question that. We have to find other ways of being in community with each other, and because capitalism is going to be the death of us all. Whether it's a pipeline, whether it's poverty, you know, like something is always more valued than our lives. And why do we put up with this system?
So, Morgan, I want to thank you for bringing up the question of anti-Black racism within people of color communities. I think it is very important to speak to, because in many ways the constitution of our present political moment and our racial economy is built on the encouragement of invidiousness amongst people of color. There are different rules, rubrics, stereotypes, and rhetorics that are applied to people of color from different backgrounds, and it is part of how we are pitted against each other because of these essentializing narratives that patriarchal white supremacy imposes on us. This ties into the construction of masculinity, the reason that there are different racialized stereotypes of Black men and Asian men and Latino men, etc., all very much in service of white supremacy and also pitting us against each other, because we as non-Black people of color are also certainly very much encouraged to fear Blacks and to stereotype them and so forth for many of the same reasons that whites are encouraged to do so. You know, we are in some ways, and in certain mycological situations, sidekicked into enforcing particular aspects of white supremacy. And that certainly is necessary to highlight. You know, the reality of the lack of solidarity that does exist at present has a lot to do with the fact that these large structures, these large social systems like capitalism, patriarchy, and white supremacy, they're all a ball of wax. The terms of art that we use are simply used to speak about specific issues at specific times, but it's all one system, ultimately. Everything is imbricated with everything else. And sustaining that requires essentialist mythologies about who men and women are, about race, about what different racial and ethnic groups are. This is where stereotypes come from, where tokenizing comes from. And so recognizing that all of that comes down to this core root is what models the movement that must stand in opposition to it, which does address all of those issues holistically and recognize and resist the seductions of white supremacy and also certainly capitalism. I mean, I could certainly speak more to that, but I think I should let our other panelists talk about it.
Just briefly, if we speak truthfully, we'll know that Black women's organizations and Black women-led reproductive justice organizations are under siege, under-resourced, unappreciated, and disregarded as the powerhouses that we are in our movement for reproductive justice, and that is because of anti-Black racism.
Right.
So let's just be very clear about that. And that at the same time, it's these same Black women's organizations who are pushing back largely against institutions that, you know, want to kind of hold power over us through women, which is you know, where the capitalist piece of the nonprofit industrial complex comes from. So as Catherine said, we can't be seduced by the temporary benefit from these structures, because in the long term we lose our vision and our pathway to the very things that we are seeking to change. And so, and even within Black communities, there is anti-Black racism that we've internalized also from the white patriarchy, from white supremacy, and all the trappings of that. In terms of how we, but just one more thing, you know, when we decided to, it's okay to talk about women of color, but it's not always okay to talk about Black women and girls.
Come on, Latasha.
I know, we're gonna go to church this morning.
Yes.
And I don't even go to church. So, you know, it was a conscious thing to change our mission to say that we are committed and dedicated to building a social change movement for the health and well-being of Black women and girls. And that's okay. And that the way we're going to do that is through reproductive justice. And that's okay. And you're going to fund us. And we're going to lead intersectional movements wherever we are. And we're going to be the voices of this movement. And there's no way to stop or change that. And so anti-Black racism is insidious and ubiquitous across all these different dimensions, and we have to not be afraid, as we are in our country, to talk about racism in our movement for reproductive justice, because we'll find ourselves in the same place as we have been.
Woo! Thank you.
That was amazing. So two things I just wanted to mention quickly. So one, much can be said about capitalism and how it creates the conditions of and the struggles of our lives. One particular thing that, you know, perhaps this goes into the keeps me up at night category, but is the insidious project of capitalism in partnership with our legal system of redefining who is a person. And taking that from people and giving it to corporations.
Yeah.
And that's not like a hypothetical of some sort of sci-fi dystopia. That is the thing that the Supreme Court has been doing every year, and we keep going deeper and deeper down that path. You know, the fact that a corporation can be too big to fail, but Black children aren't too precious to protect.
Yes.
The fact that a corporation has the political right to use the money that it gets off of not paying the low income and people of color that they're exploiting, and give that money to a political system that furthers their goals. The fact that corporations are now supposed to have religious freedom, and yet our communities don't have the freedom to walk down the street and to be safe. That is the thing that keeps me up at night. And then I also want to speak to the question about how we take care of ourselves and each other, and in particular to the question of how we ethically hold the stories of our communities. You know, at National Latina Institute for Reproductive Health, we get a lot of phone calls from folks who say, hey, can you find me a Latina who Can you find me a Latina who wants to tell her story of underground abortion to a stranger on a TV show? Can you find her for me? Can you find a queer Latina who wants to talk about being kicked out of her home? Our people are not to be traded. Our stories are not currency.
Tell them, Kimberly.
And one of the most damaging ways that in particular mainstream so-called reproductive rights organizations, mainstream so-called progressive organizations, one of the ways that they harm our community spiritually, psychically, in very real ways, is to try to take our stories from us to serve their own ends. And so that is something, you know, as an organization that is committed to reproductive justice, as a person who holds these values dear to me, I am very wary of those phone calls. And I am very aware that to ask someone to tell their story is to ask them to share a sacred thing. And that is not to win a campaign. Right?
Yeah.
So I didn't want to leave the access question dangling. And I will confess up front that certainly it is not entirely my area of expertise, but I definitely didn't want to leave that unanswered. I can't speak to access at the conference, but I can speak to it as a phenomenon connected with capitalism through the stories of sisters that I know that as corporations are now able to dump unlimited amounts of money into exercising their new right to free speech, I have a sister who's very, very dear to me, a trans woman that I know and love, who can't get on disability because the state refuses to recognize her as a person with disabilities, right? And that's because of the capitalist logic of, and neoliberal logic of the state in which she lives. She's forced to live on the $20 a week that she can scrape together from babysitting, while the state subjects her to endless gaslighting batteries of tests and forms that challenge her very sense of self and everything that she struggles with every single day. And she lives a life that is unfortunately hideously structured by capitalist oppression, that cribs the possibilities of people that live in a state where, you know, your sense of self is defined by someone who is not you. The state takes it upon themselves to be the arbiter of how you live. Do you have a disability or not is not something that is left to people who are actually living and experiencing the lives that inform that, but left to somebody who reads your serial number off of a 20-page form. And that is not dignity, and that is not justice.
That's right.
And so I think that that's the best way that I can certainly speak to that. Corey, you had something to say?
No, I wanted to say that I've had the real honor of working in partnership with the Disability Justice Collective to do some trainings. Yes, I see you. Sexy mofos. So, and one of, we created a curriculum together, and one of the really surprising aspects when we sat down and talked about how we wanted to structure the curriculum, and where were the points of solidarity, where were the places that we felt like we could say, this is a common experience, right? And I think access was a word that we landed on. And I think there is no one in this room who hasn't had an issue around access. You know, you have been shut out of some place, have been limited by something, whether it was, your skin color, your class, or whatever. We all have a common experience of having limited access at some point in our lives. And I think that when I think about disability justice, to me, I know that part of what it means, and part of what I heard, is the sense of isolation. And I feel like we all struggle with isolation. And so for me, I take it very personally that we try to figure out ways to provide access, because we all come from a place of needing it at some time. And it has to be in our consciousness, it has to be in the forefront of our mind, because we're also battling other people's isolation. And I think that we all have that experience of isolation. So it's not something that is like an other. It really is something that we can internalize and work towards, because none of us have escaped that experience of being isolated or not being able to get somewhere. And I think if you kind of think of it in that terms, you can then sort of apply it elsewhere and make sure that other folks have the same ability to get somewhere that we have. So I just wanted to put that out there to address that issue.
So I'm mindful that we have about 4 minutes left. So do each of you want to take a hot minute and just anything you want to leave us with?
It'll be very hot second. I just kind of reply to one question about how do we take care of ourselves. It's like when you're on the airplane and they say put your own oxygen mask on first before you try to assist others. That's self-help, that's self-care. And so that's my journey and my struggle right now. But one of the things that have been transformative for me is, you know, our organization is called New Voices Pittsburgh, and you know, I've been so busy trying to help people center and elevate and amplify their own voices that somewhere in that my own voice and my experience was getting lost, and that there were traumas in my life that I had to deal with, say things to my mother I needed to say, and it changed everything. And so that's how I'm able to hold it, is that, you know, you can't, you have to be able to clear out your own, those deep down inside places, you know, in your heart and your soul and your mind, to be able to do this work and hold it in a way that actually is meaningful, significant, and powerful for yourself and for those you want to serve. So thank you all very much. And it's just been an absolute honor to be on this panel this morning. Thank you.
I really want to also emphasize that I don't talk about that a lot, but I appreciate the question, that I really believe that healing has to be part of our work. We need to talk about healing. We need to create spaces for healing, because the reality is that on some level we come into this work because we want to see something. It draws us because there's some experience that we've had. And sometimes we can actually be damaging to each other in this work if we are not in healing, not working on our healing, or not trying to be aware of the ways in which we come to the work a little broken. So I want to put that out there, that I engage in my own healing work. I intentionally spend time on it because I know that I've hit walls in my activism, and I've hit places where I could not move forward. And I've been very grateful to have healers in my life who have been like, you need help. And for me to be able to say, you're right, I need help. And then the second thing that I wanted to say, because I kind of stumbled upon it at one point, but I really want us to figure out how to be in solidarity across our movements, across our identities. Because I think it's critical, and I really believe that the scariest thing to power is solidarity. And if we want to disrupt and take down these systems, we're going to have to do it together. And if we were together, they would be terrified.
So I shall try and use my hot minute to speak to this from my own experience as a trans woman of color, coming to this work, coming to this place. I am honored to have shared this panel with 3 people that I have learned so much from already, and just in being here. And I feel woefully underprepared compared to all the work that they've done in making our world a better place. And you know, I'm very proud and honored to have shared this space. What I want to leave you with is a reminder of the fact that far too often, this is now thankfully beginning to change a little bit thanks to powerful public speakers like Laverne Cox and Janet Mock, but that trans women are still often portrayed heels up in a dumpster. That death is the endemic condition of trans women, especially trans women of color. That the reality that many of us face is often perverted and turned into a fictionalized impression of who and what we are that is utterly divorced from the reality that we know and we live. For all the people in this room who self-identify as feminists and have a media critical analysis, understand that if you cannot trust the media to tell the truth about all women, why are you trusting them to tell the truth about trans women? Yeah. Recognize that they are lying about us too. Do not take what you see on Law and Order or on RuPaul's Drag Race as the be-all, end-all of what trans women are, because that is a lie, it is not true, and it has never been true. And that must be understood. If you have a media critical analysis, use it for us as well. And the last thing that I will say to you is that I am not dead yet, and I am not giving up on this work. I am not giving up on this movement, on feminism, on gender and racial justice. I am still here, my sisters are still here,
Yes.
and we are ready to go to work. We have been working, and we will be a part of this movement as we always have been. Do not believe the lies told about our history. Know that we have always been there, and we will continue to be there because these are our lives too.
So I was talking to a friend who was telling me about her daughter who's in elementary school, and the daughter is having some trouble with, friends who weren't really friends who were kind of trash talking her and not being nice to her. And what she said, and I thought it was so brilliant, what she said to her daughter was, that young girl is not welcome in our home because your name is not safe in her mouth.
Wow.
And I would leave with this thought, that we must endeavor to make one another's names safe in our mouths. I've been reflecting a lot on the history. This has been an incredible weekend celebrating 20 years of RJ. Looking at you, Adam. Celebrating undivided rights. We're celebrating 20 years of National Latina Institute of Reproductive Health. And I reflect that we hold this history together. This history lives in each of our hands and each of our hearts. And the stories of our foremothers, the stories of the struggle that goes on every single day, we must make these stories safe in our mouths. Because they are not safe anywhere else. Which is really the project of lifting up, our own and one another's humanity. And so that is what I leave with, that is what I will reflect on, and that is what I will endeavor to do, through all of these many struggles, through the struggles of our immigrant brothers and sisters, of our trans brothers and sisters, of our Native brothers and sisters, of our brothers and sisters struggling with lack of access, lack of resources to even be in spaces like this, that we have to hold these histories safe for one another, because no one else is going to do it. Woo.
After the panel's over, anyone who wants to come up and hit the mic, you're welcome to.